Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm Logan, and lately we've made a ton of videos talking about network attached storage and how you can use it to create a space to store all of your old Blu-ray movies and TV shows on the network for accessing them from any smart TV or player you might have in your home. And one thing that seems to always come up when we're talking about network attached storage like this is the Intel N100, or more specifically, NAS's using that chipset. And until this point, I've never been able to check out an Intel N100, so I never really understood what all the hype was about. But today I'm going to be checking out this unit from a company called Heelluck. This is their 2-bay mini PC NAS, and at $270 for their base model, well, this is starting to really get into the price category of much lower end ARM-based NASs that you can buy on Amazon right now. So I'm going to crack this thing open, see what's inside the box, and try to determine if this might actually be a pretty decent contender if you're in the market for a low price NAS with a lot of capability. I just got to get through the plastic on the back here, and the NAS itself is actually pretty compact. So you can see there are two drive bays for 3.5-inch SATA hard drives. Seems like they just kind of pinch like, oh wow, look at that. These are actually some pretty nice, looks like they might be toolless bays. I got a couple of 4TB drives ready here, and it almost looks like you just kind of press them into the caddy. Yeah, and they spring in. So those things feel pretty solid. I'm actually very happy with that. Slot your drives into the front like that. Very nice click. Actually feels like a solid mechanism. I'll get my other drive in here. So we're going to have two 4TB Western Digital red drives in here. At this size and for a 2-bay NAS, I feel like the most practical setup is going to be to mirror your data. So you're not getting a whole lot of data density, but you're getting the data redundancy. It feels very high quality actually, despite the fact that it's really compact. You can see some of the I/O that we're equipped with here. Interestingly, it does just look like a mini PC with a couple of hard drive bays on the front. And my unit here is supposed to have 16 gigabytes of DDR5 RAM and a 256 gigabyte solid state drive. So you can just go through and see what kind of performance that you need, what kind of requirements you have before you settle on something. I feel like this was a really good middle of the range, especially considering it wasn't that much more expensive than the base model, but go according to your needs. Overall, first impressions are very, very positive. It looks like they have the fan on the back pushing air out. Therefore, you're drawing it in from all of this ventilation on the front. Along with that, I'm also going to take a look at the accessories really quick. Looks like they give us this nice little AC power adapter. There's the specifications on that. And that's all that was in the accessory box. And before we get into the software, I wanted to take a minute to look inside the NAS and see how it's put together, since I was really curious how exactly Heelluck decided to put this hardware together, and more importantly, whether or not we have any expansion or upgrade opportunities later down the road. And to do that, I had to look for some of the screws holding this thing together, and unfortunately those are hidden under the rubber feet on the bottom, which are stuck on with adhesive, and once you take them off, you can't really put them back on the same way, which is a really big negative in terms of repairability. But once we got those out, the entire outer shell of the NAS slides off to reveal the structure of the hard drive bays, and more importantly, the N100 based SBC that's actually running the NAS. And I thought this was really interesting to see. It's actually got a slot for an 80mm M.2 SSD inside, but for whatever reason, they actually used a 42mm SSD and a spacer to fill in that slot. And just to make things even more confusing, they're hiding yet another M.2 slot under this SSD, and the image on Amazon indicates that this could be used for a Wi-Fi card. But since the case doesn't have Wi-Fi antennas, well, I'm not sure if this makes a whole lot of sense. And of course, like most N100 systems, we only get a single slot for our DDR5 SODIMM module, and in this case we have a 16GB stick of 4800 MHz DDR5. But both the SSD and RAM are from companies that I've never heard of before, so take it for what you will. I'm not going to guarantee a ton of reliability here, but at least you can upgrade this unit if you want. The N100 chip itself has this heatsink on it, but what I thought was really weird while taking it apart was how there's a copper block held onto the CPU with nothing more than an obscene amount of thermal paste, and the rest of the aluminum isn't actually bonded to the copper in any way, so I don't know how well this cooling solution is going to work, but the N100 is also a very low power chip, so maybe that isn't a very big problem. I guess we'll find out when we actually load the system. I should also mention there's a thin radial fan hiding inside the chassis which blows air through the fins of this heatsink, and along with the orange fan pulling air across the internal drives, the overall system thermals should be pretty acceptable. Either way, I managed to put all this stuff back together and loaded it up with my dual 4TB drives so I could get started looking at the software that this NAS ships with. And I was really surprised to see that it's actually being sold with a completely normal installation of Open Media Vault, which is a Debian-based Linux distribution designed for network-attached storage devices. But I should also mention that you have complete freedom in choosing whatever operating system you want to run, plug in an HDMI cable, and boot from any standard USB stick to run Windows, Linux, or maybe even TrueNAS. It's also worth mentioning that the included BIOS setup is surprisingly comprehensive for this kind of a device, but for this video I won't be messing with any of that. I'm just going to stick to the default Open Media Vault installation. And I would probably position Open Media Vault somewhere between Casa OS and something like Synology's DSM in terms of capabilities, although admittedly I haven't had a whole lot of time to learn my way around it, and I don't really think I'm qualified to make a tutorial or anything like that. But even so, I still found it pretty easy to get started, and it only took a few minutes to format my drives and put them in a RAID array for safe and redundant storage. And of course, Open Media Vault provides everything you need to start a network share over SMB, and since it's based on Debian, you can also add other apps and services that aren't directly available through Open Media Vault without extra additions, like Jellyfin for example. Just SSH in and use the command on Jellyfin's website to get started. I don't think this is technically the correct way to install Jellyfin on Open Media Vault, but it gets the job done, and once I gave Jellyfin access to the folders on my media share, I could copy movies over to it, and it played back just as expected. What I really like here is the flexibility of having a regular PC running as your home server, but with the convenient form factor and very low power consumption of a modern NAS. The N100 has a rated 6 watt TDP per Intel, which is obviously very conservative, and the standby power consumption at the wall with drives running is about 17 watts. That said, performance left a little something to be desired. I went ahead and tried running Passmark's performance test for Linux and got a pretty underwhelming CPU mark of 4045. The average score on CPU benchmark for this chip is around 5500, so this is definitely lower than normal, but I only saw a maximum of 30 watts of power draw from the wall, and a package temperature that never exceeded 51 degrees Celsius, which is really good. But since I cared more about getting a higher score, I did some research and decided to try raising the turbo boost power limits in the BIOS, meaning power consumption and heat would increase, but hopefully that also means we have more headroom during certain tasks. And after changing these power limits, we ended up getting a much more respectable CPU mark of 6187, but with 40 watts max power draw at the wall, and I read up to 75 degrees Celsius on the CPU package, so you'll have to determine if this extra heat and power consumption is worth it for your particular application. Keep in mind this is only related to turbo boost, so you should have the exact same power consumption, just running things in the background and not actively putting a load on the NAS. So ultimately, at $299 for the base model, I feel like the Helix is a pretty decent option right now, if you're willing to get your hands dirty with the OS of your choice. I just really wish they would have gone with a more reputable manufacturer for both the SSD and the RAM, since these are both very critical components, and replacing them makes the NAS no more affordable than competing options, so you have to consider whether or not you're comfortable with this compromise. But again, I didn't run into any hardware related issues during my testing, and the fact that you can upgrade it is more than enough for me. Either way, I'll leave a link to Amazon where you can buy this Helix NAS and all the other configurations that they offer, and let us know if you would consider this particular unit, or if maybe there are some other N100 NASs out there that you would be really interested in having us check out. And with all that said, I think I'm just about done here, so if you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our future content, and as always, have an awesome day.